Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep into the political rise of, well, you know him, Abraham Lincoln. Penny, $5 bill, the whole deal. But seriously, how did this guy, basically self-made, just 1 year of school, become president during, well, one of the craziest times in American history?
Yeah, it's really something.
So we've got this episode of American History Hit with historian Matthew Pinsker.
And it's packed with insights. It's like you think you know Lincoln,
Right.
but there's so much more to discover. Like, one thing that's fascinating is that his story really starts with a puzzle. At 23, this guy, minimal education, no powerful family or anything, just launches his political career.
Out of nowhere.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the crazy part is we don't have diaries or letters from that time. So we have to piece together his ambitions from his actions.
So like a detective story almost.
Exactly.
Okay, so what do those actions tell us? Was he just, power hungry or what?
Well, Pinsker, he highlights these early journeys Lincoln took down the Mississippi River. He says it was a formative experience.
You mean like literally floating down the river?
Yeah, picture young Lincoln on these flatboats.
Yeah.
Seeing the country, from the inside out, encountering, oh, this is big, the realities of slavery firsthand.
It's like a real life historical, coming of age story or something.
Yeah.
So you're saying these trips, they weren't just sightseeing.
No way. They
Yeah.
sparked his interest in infrastructure, national expansion, and that huge issue of slavery. Ideas that, became super central to his presidency. But here's the thing. Lincoln wasn't just a big picture guy.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. He was also incredibly detail-oriented.
Wait, are you about to tell me Lincoln was an inventor too?
Uh-huh. Well, it's true. He patented a device, get this, to help canal boats navigate locks. The guy was a practical problem solver. He even taught himself geometry in his spare time.
No way. So we're talking about a hands-on learner, a numbers guy.
Yep.
That's not the typical image of a politician.
Exactly. And those skills, they proved critical to his political strategy. He analyzed data, understood trends, known for his strategic thinking, all that.
Makes sense when you think about the 1830s. Tensions over slavery, abolitionism gaining momentum, pro-slavery extremists becoming more, violent.
A powder keg waiting to explode.
Literally. And that's where Lincoln's famous Lyceum address comes in, right? 1838.
Right, almost prophetic in its warnings about mob rule. The fragility of American democracy.
Okay, I vaguely remember that speech from school. Honestly, it went over my head. How does it connect to, everything that was happening at the time?
Lincoln was urging people to uphold the law, avoid mob violence,
Yeah.
stick to the Constitution, basically. He even warned that America's biggest threat might come from, within, not from outside forces.
Wow. Chilling how relevant that is today.
I know, right?
Okay, so fast forward to the 1850s, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was supposed to, let new territories decide on slavery. Huge backfire, obviously.
Leading Kansas, as they called it. Pro- and anti-slavery groups just clashing violently. Popular sovereignty, not so peaceful.
And this is where Lincoln steps onto the national stage, right? Big time.
He was disgusted by the violence, the failure of the political system to deal with slavery. And that's what led him to, help form the Republican Party,
Yeah.
dedicated to preventing slavery's expansion.
Okay, so he was opposed to slavery, but was he also, a pragmatist? I mean, he had to build a movement.
Definitely. He knew how to build a coalition, even if it meant working with people who, maybe didn't agree with him on everything.
That political savvy, that's key.
Totally.
And then there's the Lincoln-Douglas debates, 1858. Not your average political debate.
Epic.
Yeah.
Clashes of ideas, captivating the nation. And the fascinating thing is, despite pressure from other Republicans to, tone it down on the slavery issue, Lincoln refused to budge.
Wouldn't compromise his principles even to get votes.
Exactly.
That integrity, that's what made him such a compelling leader.
And it probably helped him win the 1860 election, too.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of.
Wait, before the election, can you just, paint a picture of the political landscape? Set the scene, Total chaos.
Yeah.
Deeply divided country. The Democratic Party split right down the middle. North and South couldn't agree on anything. That division, it's what made Lincoln's victory possible.
But he didn't win by a landslide.
Not even close. Majority of electoral votes, sure, but not the popular vote. He was leading a deeply divided nation right from the start. And things, they escalated quickly. Southern states, they were furious, and they started to secede.
The pressure on Lincoln must have been insane. Newly elected, and the country's falling apart.
He was working behind the scenes like crazy. And he was adamant, No compromise on slavery expanding. He knew if he gave an inch, the South would take a mile.
So he was tough, but also strategic.
You got it. High-stakes chess game,
Yeah.
trying to keep those remaining slave states in the Union, but also preparing for war because,
It was probably coming.
yeah. And then his first inaugural address, one of the most famous speeches ever.
Didn't he directly address the South? Appealing for unity, but also making it clear, no secession.
That's the one. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. Powerful stuff. Basically saying, I'm not starting this fight, but I'm ready to finish it.
But war was inevitable, right?
Sadly, yeah. Weeks later, Confederate forces attack Fort Sumter. Civil war begins. A reminder that even the most skilled politicians can't always prevent conflict, especially when...
Your divisions are that deep.
Exactly.
So now Lincoln's a wartime leader, facing challenges unlike any other president, and that's where we'll pick up next time.
Stay tuned.
So last time Civil War breaks out, April 1861, Lincoln's facing, the biggest crisis imaginable. What must have been going through his head?
I know, right? Leading a nation at war, and just a few months before, he was, a lawyer from Illinois?
But he wasn't just A&Y a lawyer, right? We talked about his strategic thinking, how he could handle complex situations. Did that help him during the war?
Totally. Those skills, from years of politics and law, super valuable. But here's what's interesting. Even with the war raging, Lincoln and the Republicans, they kept pushing their agenda.
Wait, you mean they were focused on other stuff? Beyond just, winning the war?
Exactly. Think about the Homestead Act, passed in 1862. Might seem like a weird time for domestic policy, but it makes sense when you get the whole Republican vision.
So the country's literally splitting apart, and they're working on this plan to give away free land, 160 acres, to anyone willing to, settle and farm it.
That's it. And it was huge, especially for people who'd never owned land before. It was like this idea of America, the land of opportunity, anyone can build a better life, that kind of thing.
Powerful symbol, even during a war.
Yeah. But let's be real. Lincoln was busy. Was he actually hands-on with this Homestead Act, or was it more Congress doing their thing?
Good point.
You got to remember, Lincoln wasn't a modern president like we think of them today. His main focus, managing the war, keeping the Union together, and, dealing with slavery.
So Homestead Act, more of a long-term vision. But the war, that was the immediate crisis.
Exactly.
Which brings us to, Lincoln's most famous move, the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863. But I'm guessing it wasn't just a sudden decision.
Nope, not at all. It's a whole process, a buildup of actions and events.
Okay, so what led to that moment? Was it just Lincoln, having a moral epiphany?
There's more to it than that. For you got to give credit to the enslaved people themselves. As soon as the war started, they were escaping to Union lines, risking everything for freedom.
Wow, taking their destiny into their own hands. That must have put pressure on the Union.
Big time. This mass exodus, it forced the Union to really deal with slavery. Logistically, politically, the whole thing.
Because at that point, the war wasn't officially about ending slavery. Right?
No, it was about preserving the Union. So the question became, what do you do with all these people fleeing? What's the legal side, the moral side? That's where contraband of war comes in.
I've heard that term, but I'm a little fuzzy on it.
Right, so Union General Benjamin Butler, he's at Fortress Monroe in Virginia. He refuses to return escaped slaves to their Confederate owners. His argument, slaves are property, so they could be seized as enemy property during wartime.
A loophole.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
Clever legal move, and the public loved it. Put pressure on Lincoln to take a stronger stance. And then Congress, they start passing these confiscation acts saying escaped slaves are free.
So you've got the slaves themselves acting, the military, Congress, it's all building toward emancipation.
It is. And Lincoln's navigating it all. He knows emancipation is a huge EE step, and he wants the legal political backing to make it stick.
Playing the long game.
Totally. He doesn't want a proclamation that gets tossed out by the courts or ignored by everyone. Timing is key. In fact, even after Congress passes that Second Confiscation Act in July of '62, giving him the power to free slaves in Confederate territory, he waits.
Why wait? He had the legal... Okay, right.
He did, even had a draft of the proclamation. But his advisors, Seward, the Secretary of State, they say wait for a better military situation.
Didn't want it to look desperate.
Exactly. Issuing it while the Union's losing, that's a bad look. Lincoln agrees. Emancipation needs to come from a position of strength.
So he's waiting for a win, a turning point, Antietam.
That's the one. September 1862, brutal battle, but the Union wins. Days later, boom, Lincoln announces the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. gives the Confederacy 100 days to rejoin the Union or else. Emancipation.
Talk about a power move. Come back or I change everything.
You got it. Bold move, and it shook things up.
Yeah.
The South, of course, they say no. So January 1st, 1863, Emancipation Proclamation goes into effect.
Changed the war, struck a blow against slavery, redefined America, all in one document.
And it shows Lincoln's genius. He knew emancipation wasn't just about morals, it was military, political, the whole thing.
By connecting it to the war, he got more support for both.
Exactly. It weakened the Confederacy, hurt their economy, helped the Union win. But even with all that, the fight for freedom, it wasn't over.
Right, because it only applied to Confederate states, not the border states that stayed in the Union, so slavery was still legal in parts of the U.S., even after emancipation.
Yeah, unfortunately. And Lincoln knew to really end it, they needed to change the Constitution.
The 13th Amendment, that was a long process. How did Lincoln manage that during a war?
Well, he pushed hard for it. Abolition of slavery everywhere in the U.S. He used his influence to get it through Congress, and then the states ratified it in late 1865.
Less than a year after the war ended.
A huge achievement. Even in conflict, the fight for justice can win out.
And Lincoln was at the center of it. But we also have to remember his views on race, equality, they were complex. They changed over time.
True, he was against slavery, but didn't necessarily believe in full equality for black people. He was a product of his time, you know?
We got to see these historical figures in context.
Absolutely. Celebrate the good, but acknowledge the limitations too. That's how we get a real picture of their legacy.
Well, what a journey so far. We've seen Lincoln's rise, the Civil War, the end of slavery. What's next in our Lincoln deep dive?
Wow, we've really gone deep on Lincoln, haven't we? From those river trips to the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, it's incredible.
It's amazing how much ground we've covered. And you see how, like, his strategic thinking, his political skills, that dedication to the Union, it all led to the end of slavery.
But there's this, I don't know, the shadow over everything, the tragedy of it all.
Yeah, his assassination, just days after the Confederacy surrendered. Triumph and then darkness. It's really something.
It makes you wonder, what if he had lived? How would Reconstruction have been different with him at the helm?
The big question. Historians still argue about it. Some think, Lincoln, he was pragmatic, wanting unity. Maybe Reconstruction would have gone smoother. Others say, no way, the racial divide, the politics, it was too much, even for him.
The what-ifs of history. But even after his death, his legacy, it's huge, right? Oh, absolutely. He became like this symbol, a martyr for the nation. The image on money, the monuments, his words, everyone knows Lincoln.
And we're still talking about him today. Was he reluctant to free the slaves? Just a politician playing the game? Or a true believer in equality?
All valid questions. I think we got to avoid making him a simple hero. He was a product of his time, dealing with a complicated America.
So, admire his achievements, but understand his context, too. His views weren't always, perfect by today's standard.
Exactly. See him in his historical moment, the good and the not so good.
As we wrap up our Lincoln deep dive, what are the big takeaways? What can we learn from him, even now?
Well, first, leadership matters, especially during tough times. You need strong, principled people in charge. It makes a difference.
And not just strength, but flexibility too, right? Lincoln could adapt. He showed how to think strategically, be political, compromise when needed, but without losing sight of those core values.
And man, the power of words. His speeches, his writing, they still resonate today. Freedom, equality, democracy, those themes, they're timeless.
I think the biggest thing is Lincoln shows that progress is possible, even when things seem impossible. He never lost hope, never stopped fighting for better.
And that message, it's important now too, right? We've got our own challenges, trying to make a more just, more equitable world.
This has been quite a deep dive, and I hope you, our listeners, you keep exploring Lincoln. Read his speeches, study him, join the conversation about his place in history, because it's not just about the past.
It's about now. It's about the future. The fight for freedom, for equality, for a better America. That's the story we're all part of.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time.